Shalom, Shalom, Mashpaka. Welcome back to the Straight Gate. This video here will be part 1, lesson number 2 on the 1619 Virginia's First Africans. And we'll dive right back into it and start reading here. We'll go to page 4. I think we left off on page 3. We read all this. Yeah. Now, from the top it reads, the issue of Treasurer's exploits in the West Indies was reported by Sir Edwin Sandys to the Privy Council, where the Spanish ambassador lodged a complaint against the attack on San Juan Bautista. The company disavowed Argall's operations and the treasurer's part in the attack. Elthryth may have anticipated Spanish reprisal for the attack on the Bautista, for he warned the inhabitants of Kicquetin that a Spanish attack was likely and Point Comfort should be further fortified. No attack materialized. An investigation ensued. Some witnesses, friends of Argall, Elthryth, or Warwick, told the Privy Council the White Lion forced the treasurer into consortship. Other witnesses remaining in Bermuda, not part of the privateers faction, suggested Elthryth had stolen some of the captives that were supposed to go to Captain Jope and the White Lion. If so, this would explain why White Lion apparently had fewer than 30 captives on board when she arrived at Point Comfort, and how Treasurer arrived in Bermuda with 27 and 29 enslaved Africans, even after having sold others at Kicquetin. The enslaved Africans brought by the treasurer were caught up in the ongoing investigation, and some crew members and part owners of the ship filed claims to ownership of a share of the Africans. There are several reasons why White Lion's privateering activities were allowed, whereas the treasurer's parallel actions mushroomed into a years-long scandal. White Lion had a valid letter of marque, while Treasurer's was expired. White Lion dealt transparently with Virginia's governor and Cape Merchant. Treasurer was tied to Argall, who was being investigated for corruption and illicit activities. And Treasurer's connections to Argall and Warwick gave the appearance of the attack on the San Juan Bautista being perpetrated by the company and linked it to the crown, putting Virginia in danger of attack from the Spanish, or James I, in danger of losing England's peace with Spain. Sandys, as an officer of the Virginia Company, moved to expose and denounce the treasurer's exploits to shield the company from blame. However, the scandals, permission of the company, and continuing fallout contributed to the Crown's revocation of the Virginia Company charter in 1624. Now that we see there's a scandal going on because of the cargo that was stolen from one ship to another, that could have caused an all-out breaking of the treaties between Spain and England. Right? Continuing on. From West Central Africa to Virginia. Virginia's first Africans were probably from the kingdom of Ndongo, located between Lucala and Kwanza rivers, in the West Central Africa and part of present-day Angola. Ndongo's population was made of Kimbundu-speaking people living in densely populated, urbanized cities and towns, and nearby farming settlements, where people grew sorghum and millet and raised cattle and poultry. The kingdom's capital city, Kabasa, was its royal seat of power and had a population of up to 50,000. In 1618, the Portuguese allied with Mbangala mercenaries and invaded Ndongo. During the ensuing 1618-1820 campaign, thousands were enslaved. The San Juan Bautista was one of the least 36 ships transporting captives to Spanish-Portuguese colonies in 1619 alone. Most of the captives were probably from urban areas in and near the capital city of Cabasa, and unlike the vast majority of enslaved Africans carried to America, the San Juan Bautista captives probably came from a single or a few related ethnic groups and shared common or similar languages and cultures. They were also captured more directly under European authority than the enslaved Africans. European trade for enslaved Africans began in the 1400s. In 1575, the Portuguese established the colony of Angola on the Kwanza River. Its purposes were to export enslaved captives, as served as a base for Jesuit Catholic missionaries, and trade in goods from 1576 to 1605. The Portuguese fortified the city of Luanda, a large port through which thousands of captives were exported each year. Thousands of captives were exported each year from the Kingdom of Angola. In early 1619, the San Juan Bautista left Luanda, carrying 350 enslaved Africans, and bound for Veracruz, Mexico. 200 were earmarked to fulfill an asiento, or contract, for delivering enslaved Africans to Spanish colonies. The voyage was apparently beset by disease. Between 120 and 150 of the Africans died, a death rate of 35 to 43%. The captain, Manuel Mendez de Acuña, ordered a stop in Jamaica to refresh. There he traded 24 enslaved boys in return for supplies. In late July or early August, the San Juan Bautista was attacked in the Bay of Campeche, southern Gulf of Mexico, by two English privateers, the White Lion and the Treasurer, which stole approximately 60 of the captives, probably the healthiest of the Africans remaining. After the attack, the Bautista's remaining captives were transferred by the local authorities to frigate Santa Ana, which arrived in Veracruz on August 30th, 1619. On its arrival, 147 captives were declared as her cargo. This probably included the 24 boys in Jamaica, but it possibly does not. So we see during the point of transporting slaves, the captives on board were dying at an exponential rate due to malnourishment, lack of hygiene, all sorts of. I'll bring up some images. Okay, as you can see here, as you can see here, the captives were being held below deck, no sunlight, all chained up one to another, packed tightly like sardines. Right? Let's see if I can get out of this image real quick. How do you do this? A second. Ay. I guess I'll just click out of here. Okay. You can see here. The captives that were taken from Angola and different various regions in Africa and exported across the continents via the slave ships that were being utilized at that time for using human resources as a commodity in order to build up civilizations and to harvest tobacco and food crops and so on and so forth without having to pay them anything. This 1619 article says, right? Now you can see why they were probably perishing at an exponential rate, because if they're all layered together and sandwiched in this manner, like a bunch of sardines in a can, urine and feces would trickle down onto the lower deck, ultimately having everyone covered in feces and urine. You can just imagine the environment that was below these ship decks. You know, no sunlight. You can probably hear people crying and wailing and suffering. And I bet you there was moments where there was just an overabundance amount of prayers being sent up, pleading and just so awful. You know, the person next to you, whatever, is, you know, they're dying right next to you while you guys are all being chained up. And this is the history. This is the history that's tied to our scriptures for the transgressions that we had against the Most High. You know, look at this. Young boys probably going to be sold for wine, or a boy for a harlot, I think scripture says. Yeah, yeah. Man, let's get out of here. So, we'll go back 1 second. Boom, boom. Right back into us reading here, right? So, we'll pick it back up from here. In early 1619, the San Juan Bautista left Luanda carrying 350 enslaved Africans and bound for Veracruz, Mexico. 200 were earmarked to fulfill an afiento, or contract, for delivering enslaved Africans to Spanish colonies. The voyage was apparently beset by disease. Between 120 and 150 of the Africans died, a death rate of 35 to 43%. The captain, Manuel Mendez Acuna, ordered to stop in Jamaica to refresh. There, he traded 24 enslaved boys in return for supplies. In late July or early August, the San Juan Bautista was attacked in the Bay Campeche, right, by two English privateers. Um, 60 of the captives were stolen and were probably taken by the White Line before they landed in Veracruz. All right, so um, the early Africans in Virginia. Virginia's first census was conducted in early 1620. See above. 32 Africans, 15 male, 17 female, were living in Virginia. Most likely, all were from San Juan Bautista and arrived via the White Lion or Treasure. None were identified by name. The next census, taken in February 1624, records only 21 Africans. Several probably succumbed to disease or died in the 1622 Powhatan Indian uprising. Although some may have been traded or moved by enslavers to Bermuda or England, only 13 are identified by name, and only one has a surname. The rest either have none or are labeled as Negro, suggesting most of the Africans were enslaved. See below. At least two Africans in this group were not from the White Line or Treasure. Anthony, later known as Anthony Johnson, arrived on the James 1621, and John Philip, the only African with a surname, was known to have been baptized in England. A 1625 muster lists 23 Africans. Again, several are unnamed. If there are were no deaths, it is possible no new Africans were brought to Virginia between 1624 census and 1625 muster, since 2 children are listed in 1625. There is a bit of information in between the main. I'll go ahead and read it. Though the Portuguese government discouraged use of African mercenaries by colonial governors, the practice was commonplace. In the 1618 In the 1620 campaign to conquer Ndongo, Governor Mendez de Vasconcelos allied with the 3 bands of Mbangala warriors. The combined Portuguese and Bangala forces swiftly conquered Ndongo and its capital city in Mombasa. Right here, it looks like the Portuguese colonizers came into this portion in this region in Africa and used their own people to enslave another group of people, right? Because you have to know at this time and during the time of our history that different regions around the world had different kingdoms, and within those different kingdoms on a continent or a landmass held different varieties of tribes and peoples with different cultures. Colonizers at this time came in to enslave and use their own people on that landmass to enslave another region, right? Probably for the resources that land had, right? This is the only reason why you would clear out lands, is so that way you can use up the resources on the land. That's probably why we see here that the Portuguese came in and used Mbangala warriors or tribes to go and take and capture the Ndongo kingdom, right? Manuel Bautista Soares, Bishop of Congo, reported in 1619 that in place of leaving off with the Jagas in Bangala, he, Manuel Bautista, embraced them, and he has gone to war with them for 2 years, killing with them and capturing innumerable innocent people. Innocent blood. Those who were not able to flee were enslaved. The number of enslaved Africans captured during these campaigns was so great that they far outstripped the capacity of the port of Luanda to hold and export them. I think that's a very critical piece of information right there. It says those who were not able to flee were enslaved. The number of enslaved Africans captured during these campaigns was so great that they far outstripped the capacity of the port of Luanda to hold and export them. Slavery existed in Africa before European colonization, but it was quite different and does not compare to the scale or extent of enslavement and trade in slaves driven by Europeans. The Most High says he was angry with the heathen, but they furthered the affliction, right? They furthered the affliction. Slaves in pre-colonial Africa still had legal rights. Status did not pass from parents to children. Slaves were not a major labor force. Slavery was not necessary for life. Slaves were only enslaved in specific circumstances, i.e. as prisoners of war or as punishment. And slavery was not race-based. In the colonial period, very few Africans participated in the slave trade with Europeans, and Europeans vastly broadened the scale of the slave trade and locations and circumstances of their capture and labor. Interestingly, the enslaved Africans on the San Juan Bautista were likely captured directly by Portuguese and allied Bangala troops as part of a military campaign against Ndongo, though this was not typical. Those who have studied biblical history and are tying all this together know that the Africans who they claimed that were enslaved were Semitic people, and the ones that helped the colonizing people were Hamitic. You have Semitic, Hamitic, and Japhet, right? So the Semitic people are the ones who are described here being enslaved and were under the curses, according to Deuteronomy 28. Reading on. The summer months were when Spanish treasure galleons transported extracted gold and silver from the local ports to Havana to prepare for shipping via an annual convoy to Europe. The English pirates probably hoped Bautista was laden with gold and silver. The wording of the primary sources seems to imply that Bautista stopped in Jamaica after the privateer attack. However, currents in the southern Caribbean flow east to west, and the attack took place on the other side of the Yucatan Peninsula in the Bay of Campeche. It is unlikely that Bautista sailed against the current back to Jamaica when she was so close to Veracruz. However, the narrative also indicates that a frigate transported the Bautista's human cargo into Veracruz, presumably following the attack. Anthony Johnson's story is well documented. He began an enslaved man, but was able to purchase his freedom and eventually acquired a plantation on Virginia's eastern shore. He began an enslaved man, but was able to purchase his freedom. So he was taken as a captive, stolen, kidnapped from another country, another landmass, taken to another one to be forced into slavery. Who knows what that man endured as a slave, being separated probably from his family, children, friends, everything he knows, and then was given the ability to purchase his freedom? And then he was eventually he acquired a plantation. So you take someone, you forcibly take them captive, you put them in this area here, you do whatever you want to them, and then you offer them the ability to purchase their freedom in which they were already free from the very beginning, and then you offer them land to purchase that was not yours in the first place and does not really belong to them. This is crazy. This is confusing, right? Where are we at here? He began as an enslaved. We read that. Um, he is perhaps most well known for taking black and white bound laborers to court to enforce the terms of their contracts or labor. Some online sites have incorrectly claimed that Johnson was the first slave owner in America. I wonder why that is. Oddly, Johnson is often the only individual discussed in descriptions of the landing of the first Africans. Such a narrative is puzzling, I bet, since Johnson did not arrive with the first group in 1619. Moreover, Johnson's story was exceptional and belies the very different experiences of the vast majority of early Africans. Anthony Johnson is sometimes confused with Anthony Tucker in some narratives. So, the spectrum of this situation here. Someone is taken from their land forcibly, forced into forced labor into another landmass, whatever have you. They are to abide in particular set of code of conduct and laws in order to continue to live, right? And then, after being conformed into that society or the way that system operates, you are then what options do you have? Can you say, can I want to go back to where I came from? Is there a vessel or something waiting for me so I can go back to where I came from? Because now I'm forced to operate in your society, and now I'm being labeled as a slave owner because that is what is on my plate because I have to operate in the society. John Philip's surname appears in court records in late 1624, but he is not named in the census earlier that year. He may have arrived after the census was taken. John Philip testified against a white man. This term, white man, African, whatever, these are all bywords, by the way, right? And is the only African given a surname in early records. He almost certainly was a servant rather than enslaved, but was an exception. He had spent 12 years in England, and his command of English language and culture probably set him apart from other Africans in the eyes of English colonizers. He may also have had the opportunity to negotiate an indentured contract before sailing to Virginia. So I wonder how that works. You are taken captive and put into cattle slavery or chattel slavery, and now somehow that got turned into an indentured contract. Interesting. Laws are really interesting. Where are we at here? Okay. I'll finish up this one. You know what? There we go. We'll stop right here and we'll pick this one back up a little later. Feel free to go ahead and read on if you'd like, whatever. But as I continue, I will provide some scripture and some illustrations and some content that could help tie all this together. So that concludes part 1, second video of the 1619 First Virginia's Africans. Until next time, shalom.